So I'm Sarah. I'm the Chief Health AI Officer at UCSF Health, and I'm also faculty in the Division of Clinical Informatics and Digital Transformation, which is led by Julia Adler-Milstein as our chief. And Janus is she holds many leadership roles at UCSF, but she is also our Executive Director of AI Monitoring and Clinical Care, leading the development of this platform. And so we're going to start out, I'm going to give you a kind of a high-level overview of the history of kind of AI at UCSF and in governance and how we got to where we are now. And why we are building IMPACC. And then Janus is going to go into details about what IMPACC is, how we're approaching it, and how we're leveraging it moving forward. Okay, so I think, for those of you who are from AMCs, you may have kind of similar looking timelines. But, at UCSF, it was really only about 10 years ago when we started doing anything kind of AI related at all. And calling it AI was a stretch because really what we were talking about were predictive models, regression models, things like that. And so we initially got access about 10 years ago to Epic's cognitive computing platform. We started looking at evaluating and deploying some of the predictive tools that they were sending our way. But it wasn't sufficient to initially serve the research needs. And so a couple things happened at the time. First, we had products deployed without adequate evaluation that led to some issues in the health system. And then we also found that there really wasn't good infrastructure in place to support deployment of more sophisticated model types, larger models with different features, et cetera. And so two big things came out of that and the gaps that we identified at the time. One is under the leadership of Jose and Soleimani, we built our health IT platform for advanced computing. And second, we established our initial AI oversight committee. And so our health AI platform for advanced computing, just at a very high level, was really intended to support, to give us more flexibility in the types of models we were deploying and how we were evaluating them. And then our oversight committee, we put together as a multidisciplinary committee to really start thinking about benefits and risks across the AI lifecycle, and have a standardized way to approach to evaluate tools across the AI lifecycle as we were deploying them to make sure they were truly trustworthy, safe, effective, et cetera. That was all in good timing because it was a couple of years ago, we got an inquiry from the California Attorney General, and they were curious, how have you assessed these tools for bias? Tell us all of the AI at UCSF Health and how you've assessed it for bias. And we knew the few things that we deployed in the health system, but in reality, we had suspicion there was a lot more happening. And so the way we approached this was we had our team go through everything that had come through IT security and risk assessment in the last 5 years, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tools. And we found 60 that had AI as part of it. And no one knew how it was being used or how it had been evaluated for bias. And so that really kind of added fuel to the fire around the urgency of having scalable systems for both evaluation and monitoring. Flash forward a year or so until we all entered the generative AI era when ChatGPT first came out. We were making poems. And then, we were a little bit late in coming to this, but as we deployed Nebula, which is Epic's cloud model at UCSF, we got a lot more access to features and tools that we could train internally at UCSF. And finally, we also built a in-house HIPAA compliant ChatGPT-like tool where we could start developing our own use cases with large language models in a HIPAA compliant way. And so as all of this happened, we started deploying generative AI tools in the health system. And again, like as our AI oversight committee was kind of chugging along, we really realized there was this gap in like having a standardized approach for monitoring large language models. And so we were very fortunate to receive a generous donation that allowed us to launch IMPACC. And that's what you're going to hear about today. See the next slide. So I mentioned our health IT platform for advanced computing. This is just the high-level architecture, but you can see it's quite foundational in allowing us to do monitoring specifically for tools that are developed in-house by our AI team or by our research community. And so we are able to bring in real-time and historical data. We have a feature store. We can run any model type, store predictions, write them back into IMPACC to drive clinical decision-making or workflows, and then have a space to also do predictive monitoring. And so as we talk about various HIPACC use cases, this is critically important for tools that we are developing in-house or tools that our research community is developing and we plan to monitor longitudinally. Okay, so how are we approaching AI governance in general, which I've mentioned our AI oversight committee, and I'll talk about that briefly. But I think one thing that we learned after a couple of years of doing this is our AI oversight committee was not sufficient, because our AI oversight committee was really built to guide evaluation and deployment of trustworthy AI, but it wasn't meant to do prioritization and resourcing. And so what we've ultimately built out at UCSF is a kind of two-tiered approach to AI governance. So we have health AI steering that makes determinations about prioritization and resourcing, and then we have health AI oversight that does a trustworthiness evaluation. And so our health AI steering committee is largely focused on what does the health system invest in? How do we ensure that initiatives don't just have the appropriate IT resourcing, but also have the appropriate operational resourcing and partnership to be successful? And so we've built that committee largely with health system operational leadership and some health IT input. However, that committee, as operational leaders of UCSF Health, doesn't necessarily have the expertise to do that trustworthiness evaluation. And so that's where we lean on our Health AI Oversight Committee to do that work and really provide this unified governance or trustworthy evaluation for all use cases that touch patient lives. I don't care if it's something our researchers built, if it's something that we are buying from a vendor like an AI scribe, or if it's something that coming to us from IMPACC, or if it's something that my team internally built. We are holding all tools to the same set of standards if they touch patient lives. And in doing that, we've put together a very kind of multidisciplinary committee to do that work. So we have folks from the health system, like our health AI team and our informaticists. We also have health equity experts, privacy, legal risk, compliance, IT security, ethicists, our IRB leader, and a number of research faculty. And so that is the committee doing that important work. Everyone on this call has probably seen this. The framework we use are the HHS guidelines for trustworthy AI. And if you go to the next slide, what we've done throughout the process is really embed those principles of trustworthy AI in a kind of detailed review that we do across the AI lifecycle. And so we ask questions prior to deploying these tools about what alternatives have you considered? What are the workflows that you're using? What reporting's in place for tracking process and outcome metrics, et cetera. And all of these questions are aimed at ensuring that we're addressing each of the principles for trustworthy AI. The places we look at tools, and this is how we kind of broke down the AI lifecycle. And the AI Oversight Committee has to date really intervened at stages A, B, and C. So when we have a model that has retrospective data and we're considering putting it into our health IT platform for advanced computing, or HIPACC, to do a prospective study, the committee does a pretty detailed engagement, recognizing that not all tools can have that. Like, for example, AI scribes, we don't have like retrospective data on how they perform. When we have that prospective kind of initial validation and we're ready to do a randomized control trial or pilot of an AI tool. And then finally, once we have that initial RCT or pilot data, and we're considering broader user adoption. Now, this is where it gets interesting, is because, you know, the structure of that initial committee was really focused on, like, should we deploy this at all in the health system? But what we're really thinking about now with IMPACC is like, okay, now that we've deployed, how do we monitor? And, you know, how do these tools come back to this committee, and at what frequency? Do we review them every 6 months? Do we review them once a month? Or do we, you know, put the structures into place with IMPACC to, you know, have a system where things come back on an as-needed basis? And so Janus is going to talk a little bit about that. But all of the efforts now, or much of the effort, is really in thinking about that piece. Once we've deployed, how do we continue to monitor? Just to show you a little bit, because I mentioned this two-tiered process, the idea is, like, as these things move across the life cycle, they go back and forth between these committees. And so our Health AI Steering Committee really leans on our AI Oversight Committee to tell them, like, is this, you know, we wanted the tool to solve X, Y, or Z problem in the health system. Now that we are testing this tool, or we are piloting this tool, or deploying the tool, is it working? And likewise, the relationship between our IMPACC team and Health AI Steering is the intention is for it to be very similar. Now that we have, as a health system, have made this decision to deploy the tool, can we trust that it's trustworthy on an ongoing basis? So at a high level, and Janus is going to speak to this in much more detail, but so IMPACC is our impact monitoring platform for AI in clinical care, which we really see as a combination of infrastructure and robust processes to do the metric adjudication work and really put into place ways to handle the data once we're deploying it, or once we're measuring it. It's very unique in that it is, at UCSF at least, it's the first kind of true partnership between the health system and the academic enterprise solving a health system problem. And we're thinking about our IMPACC to borrow from McKinsey, like, as the 3-horizon framework. Right now, our focus is largely on Horizon 1, which is those critical operational metrics, slowly moving into Horizon 2, which are the more advanced insights. And then through Doc IT and Janus's leadership, we're really trying to open up Horizon 3 and provide opportunities for researchers to engage with IMPACC and start answering those kind of open research questions that we all have about AI monitoring and how we do this right in healthcare. Our kind of near-term goal is really just building this generalizable monitoring infrastructure for our enterprise tools at UCSF Health. And we're starting with kind of 5 big use cases. So AI scribes, which we'll hear about today, drafting and summarization tools, leaning on ones that are in Epic right now, and a clinical prediction tool, and then an administrative prediction tool. And the idea is we've tried to pick fairly diverse use cases, so that as we build out this infrastructure, we're making sure that it's actually generalizable to additional use cases, and not super custom to, you know, the one that's right in front of us. And so for each of these use cases, we're developing measures of performance and trustworthiness. And then we're really thinking about 2 broad audiences. So one is our internal operational team, and that is really to inform our AI governance processes. And then long-term, we're really thinking about external stakeholders like our patients and the ability of these tools to really help with transparency. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Janus, who's going to talk more about how we're thinking about this with large language models.
All right, such a pleasure to be with you all today. So I'll start with a little bit of context, which is that large language models are already reshaping healthcare. Like Sara mentioned, people are using them to summarize patient charts, to provide summaries during patient-doctor conversations, to draft responses to patient messages. And I've been personally surprised at how fast implementation is accelerating, and not just in academic centers, but really across the community. The AMA did an interesting survey just asking people about their use of AI. 2 in 3 physicians are using health AI in some capacity, and 1 in 5 are using it for documentation of billing codes, medical charts, or visit notes. And 1 in 5 are using it for creation of discharge instructions, care plans, and also for translation services. These are common uses, and there are many others as well. So I think we're already seeing sort of a rapid shift in use of these tools. And from my perspective, monitoring these tools in healthcare is incredibly important. The first point I want to make is that, as we all know, testing is not the same as what we see in real-world deployment. This is true for a variety of things. It's true for drugs, it's true for devices. LLMs will behave differently in the real world than under development conditions, even when they've been developed with meticulous care, with multi-site validation. I think, as we know, the real world can be very messy. The second thing is that models change, and this makes this category of tools different than drugs and devices, right? They're constantly evolving. That adds complexity. And even though our use of these tools is still so early, I think the risks have already been well documented. Hallucinations that sound competent but are wrong, bias that's baked into training data, producing inequitable output, workflow problems that frustrate users or even delay care, and then challenges with transparency that erode trust. And I'm a practicing rheumatologist. I use some of these tools in practice, and I'll just share an example from clinic a couple weeks ago. I take care of patients who have autoimmune disease and are often on immunosuppressant drugs. And my AI scribe tool entered a hallucinated statement into the after-visit summary for one of the patients that I was caring for. It said, "Please continue your tacrolimus 1 milligram twice a day." Now, this patient was not on this drug. I had not mentioned the name of this drug even once during the encounter, and the patient had not either. So this truly was a hallucination. But the danger or risk was that this patient had been on this drug in the past. So you can imagine a situation where, if you don't carefully review the output of the large language model, there could actually be severe consequences, even life-threatening ones. And although this is rare, and for the most part, these tools work beautifully, and I'm very happy to have them, I think we need to monitor them at the individual level with sort of physician oversight, but also more broadly to understand how often things like this are happening. So one question is, why are we allowing LLM-based tools to reach the clinic without sort of more universal monitoring standards? And I think there's a number of reasons, but some of the key ones are that I think there's just a lot of innovation pressures. Our health systems feel pressure to implement these new tools, often without the resourcing or all the guardrails in place. I think, unfortunately, we have a regulatory vacuum. Unlike drugs or devices, there's no single agency right now that's responsible for overseeing these LLM-based tools. There's also this interesting disclaimer loophole. So most of these LLMs provide disclaimers that they are not intended for medical advice, and so they fall outside of our current FDA regulatory sort of authority framework. However, I think those of us who are using these tools understand that they can subtly shape decisions, documentation, billing. And so this distinction, I think, is already gray and going to become more gray over time as a lot of the vendors and EHRs and even researchers that are developing these LLMs are moving more into things that I think are intended for medical advice. And I think that from my point of view, the regulatory infrastructure will likely eventually catch up, but we obviously can't wait. And that really is the impetus for IMPACC, as Sara already laid out. And so really this is, I think, a unique and new partnership between our health system and the Division of Clinical Informatics and Digital Transformation, which houses faculty who do research in clinical informatics. And really, I think our CEO put it nicely, our goal is to create a platform that'll provide real-time visibility into AI tool performance and really assess the impact of these tools. So what's the mission of the project? Well, first and foremost, we want to build a platform that monitors the things that matter and provide oversight of these tools for our health system. We also hope to advance outcomes and trust, to really try to improve clinical and operational outcomes while ensuring that AI is safe, equitable, and transparent. And then I think an important part of this project and a key part of the partnership is that we set standards for research. So we want to support innovative research and really try to establish new ways of monitoring AI and developing benchmarks for accountability. And we're envisioning that the platform really will have multiple components. It will have dashboards that track metrics and sort of visualize analytics. The data integration layer is very important. IMPACC, which Sara already mentioned, is part of that. But the platform should also serve as a repository for issues related to governance, compliance, and version histories of AI models to the extent that we can access that information, especially from vendors, reporting and analytics tools. And then a key part of this is just, coordination across all of the people that are touching these tools and implementing these tools, evaluating these tools in our health system. So in terms of the leadership of this project, Sara and also Hossein Soleimani have really been key partners on the health system side. Julia Adler-Milstein will join us later today for our discussion portion, and she's chief of the Division of Clinical Informatics at UCSF and has been a wonderful sort of gateway to the research community. And then we also have an outstanding program director, Sara Pollitt, who's pictured on the right there. And then there's a whole team of data scientists, informaticists, operational leaders, administrative support, and researchers who are currently working on this project. So I'm going to take you through some of what we've done already. And, this is still pretty early. We're still not even a year into this project. But the very first thing that we did was just think about the scope of AI monitoring. That's a very broad category of things. What is it that we want to monitor? And as we reviewed the frameworks that exist out there, including the HSS model, which Sara already mentioned, we realized that there were things that we wanted to measure in our health system that didn't clearly fall into some of the categories in existing frameworks. And they include things like monitoring utilization. Are people using the tool? Are they engaging with it? Are they retaining use? Or are they just trying it and then sort of dropping it? The impact on workflow, it's so important in healthcare. Time efficiency, is it disrupting workflows? Is it actually making things easier? I think we are all worried about automation bias. We have a human interacting with these AI tools, and is there a risk that we will increase sort of unquestioned acceptance of AI output, and that we'll start to see override rates and edit frequencies and things like that reduce in a way that is unwarranted. And then I think that these last two categories are critically important. What's the healthcare professional experience? We all know that burnout levels are high. People have a very high cognitive burden when they're doing clinical work. I certainly do. And so are these tools working for our healthcare staff? And then also the patient experience, of course. Are patients satisfied? What are their perspectives on the use of their data in these models? And do they trust AI-driven output? So there's just a lot of other things that we wanted to measure. And we start every measurement project by thinking about these domains and prioritizing the things that we want to measure for each category. So step 2 has really been working to develop a unified set of AI monitoring measures. In our health system, and I'm sure in many of yours as well, there's just a risk of a very chaotic monitoring environment where, you know, people who are in operations, data scientists, people working on patient experience, unit leaders, others all have sort of different needs and are looking at the same data in different ways. That leads to duplication and sort of non-standardized ways of looking at things. And so our goal is to really create a unified set of impact AI monitoring measures. You can kind of think about it as like a central highway or central artery, and then people can, you know, grab the things that are useful for their purposes to the extent possible. I mean, obviously there might be some unique things that people need, but we really wanted to avoid duplication and waste and try to align measurement. So that's been another, you know, key thing that we've been working on over the last few months. And I will just tell you a little bit about our impact measure development process. We start with literature reviews and consulting with experts to just see what the science has said about measuring specific tools up until you know, the time of the review. And then we have a consensus process with broad stakeholder input to review which domains to measure. And we run rapid Delphi panels where people across the healthcare system have the opportunity to vote. And then we implement these measures once they're approved by our process. And I'll just give you an example. We've run this process a few times now for different tools. Here was the process for our ambient listening product. So we first started with a structured literature review to retrieve published measures. And then we prioritized the domains that we were interested in measuring for this particular tool. We drafted initial measure concepts based on the literature and adding things that we thought were important. And then we invited operational leaders, data scientists, clinicians, researchers, everybody to the table to discuss the measures, refine the concepts, vote on them. And that leads to an initial measure set that we specify in more detail and then build into our platform. And this is just an example of the measure set for AI scribe monitoring. You can see that, you know, we touched a lot of domains. We looked at fairness, whether the tool was robust or reliable, whether there was impact on workflow. We looked at utilization. We looked at the healthcare professional experience, and each and every one of these are voted on for importance and feasibility. And those that are both important and at least moderately feasible go on to be built in our process. And this is just a screenshot of the impact dashboard for the AI Scribe program. And you can see that it has a lot of information about utilization, retention. We're also building sections to look at some of the measures around workflow and the healthcare professional experience. So I want to touch on sort of the research part of this, which is, you know, trying to build systems to collaborate with researchers on measures that have high importance, but lower feasibility. So as we go through our consensus process, people say, well, it would be wonderful to measure X. But as we discuss it as a group, we realize that maybe we don't have the data in place to measure it right now. Or maybe we actually just don't even know how to measure this concept yet. And we need to really do more fundamental science to understand how to measure this particular concept. And so high value, but currently infeasible measures enter our impact research incubator. And researchers can collaborate with our team and the health system to really refine and test these concepts. And like I said, some measures will require entirely new innovations in monitoring methods. And some of the things that are currently in our incubator, just to give you a sense of some of our research collaborations. So we're looking at automation bias as it relates to the AI scribe implementations, working with researchers who have expertise in this area. There's been, I think a lot of interest in revenue impact, but there are a lot of complexities to measuring that. And so working with a team of people that will help us understand all the nuances of the revenue impact of implementation of the scribe tool. And then a really interesting project to look at some of the qualitative information that's coming to us from multiple streams. So just for the AI Scribe project, people are submitting IT tickets, they're calling the help desk, they're contacting the operational leaders, they're even entering things into Press Ganey surveys, they're entering comments into the app. So there's this like sea of qualitative information. And I think, trying to manually annotate all of that is challenging, but we're looking into methods to try to use large language models actually to automate some of those data streams in a way that will actually be helpful as we review how these products are performing. And like Sara mentioned, currently IMPACC is really in the first horizon of AI monitoring. We're just doing basic AI monitoring to assess value, risk, and compliance. But really the goal is to start to do more advanced analytics, really look at building infrastructure to do more automated AI monitoring. And with the end goal, having at least part of the system provide real-time autonomous monitoring that can detect issues across multiple different AI systems. And the reasons I think that moving towards Horizon 3 is so important is that I think resources for monitoring these LLMs at our health systems are limited, and manual review processes, which I think we have to do to some extent in this pilot phases of these projects, are expensive, and the workforce is very stretched. And so some of the things that we're thinking about, like I said, LLMs that summarize feedback from clinicians and patients, models that drift things like drift, looking at override patterns in an automatic way, and then surveilling for bias. And there's obviously many more things that we can think about, but those are just some of the things that we're thinking about now. And I'll just end by talking about what I think some of the challenges are that we face. Obviously, there's tremendous opportunity, and I do think that we are going to see a transformation of some aspects of healthcare, hopefully for the better. But I think these challenges that I'll mention are things that we're going to have to address. So the first is funding headwinds. So the political environment is leading to health system cutbacks and hiring freezes of research staff and things like that. And that will impact our efforts to monitor AI deployments. I think the regulatory infrastructure may be delayed. This is, of course, to be determined, but at the current time, we don't have a lot of precedent for the use of many of these tools. And with the reduction in force, layoffs and things that are happening at the FDA, it seems likely that the risk and burden of monitoring is likely to stay with the end users for at least the next several years. AI products continue to change very quickly. I'm sure many of you are experiencing kind of the same thing. There's just a lot of stuff coming at us, and keeping track of all the tools, the vendor updates, which we're going to implement, how we're going to monitor all these tools. I think that's going to become more challenging. And the monitoring costs are likely to rise, but difficult to predict. And so there's definitely feels like there might be a Sisyphean task ahead of us. But I think that by collaborating, I love this forum. This is a great way for us to build such collaborations. We can hopefully split up some of this work and share some of what we're doing to make the lift a little bit easier. And we are certainly open to sharing our framework, our measures, our builds, any of our research insights and lessons learned with all of you. So please contact us. This is my email here. You should definitely feel free to email me at any time. And with that, I will stop sharing and we can move on to questions. And I think we have plenty of time, so.
And folks can feel free to either put questions in the chat or raise their hands. I see Deb Raji has a question.
Hi. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, great to hear about this. I'm actually at UC Berkeley, and so very close, and I'm really surprised I haven't encountered this before, but there's a group of folks at UC Berkeley thinking about sort of online evaluation and approaches to thinking through the sort of automatic flagging as the data sets shift and as use cases shift. So yeah, Janus, I'm happy to connect with you after. But I was curious how you're thinking about data releases for the research community in terms of the usage data. So, prompts and responses from the model or metadata related to users and use cases, and just sort of, what the roadmap is in terms of making that available to researchers, or how open you guys are to working at that level of granularity in terms of data release with researchers. And then I think my second question related to this is you mentioned sort of informal feedback, the qualitative feedback that you're getting on the AI scribe use case. I'm curious if through the monitoring interface or other mechanisms, you've actually been able to solicit feedback through this system. And if that's something that you guys are aspiring to do in like future iterations of this platform. So some kind of, thumbs up, thumbs down, or more detailed feedback as people make use of the system.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. So I've been working my way slowly through some of the Berkeley team. And actually, I don't know if you know Irene Chen, but she is working with us on this qualitative piece. So I'm very happy to meet you and I would love to collaborate. I think we are trying to create, I like to call it a big tent. We want everybody to have room to collaborate with us. So and we have set up a committee. I always forget what the acronym stands for, but it's called the UHeart committee. And basically, if the data that people are interested in falls outside of things that are generally in the EPIC data warehouse called Clarity. For example, you need like the dates that people signed up to be on the scribe, or the date they went live and things like that. Then we have systems in place to release those data sets. I think so far, what we have done is submitted some IRBs that are quite broad. They're kind of umbrella IRBs for IMPACC. And so if things that you're interested in fall within the scope of what the health system needs and these IRBs, then there might be sort of a quick road to data access. So yes, we would love to talk more. And then I think your second question was about like feedback, in the app itself, for example, for the ambient listening product. So that is available like when I as the end user and am using the product, there's always a face page where I can like type feedback. It's not really a thumbs up or thumbs down type of situation, but you can, free text comments, there's, a help desk that'll get back to you. And then we survey people at an interval of every 3 months to ask their more global input. And then we have an IRB for qualitative studies where we're going to really do a deep dive. I actually think that there's only so much you can get from like surveys and comment analysis. You have to talk to humans, just say, how's this going? Tell me about like, the most egregious thing that happened in terms of a hallucination. Tell me about, situations where it's working really well. Tell me about patient populations that this tool is not working. And I have just those conversations have actually been the most interesting for me. So yeah, there's lots of things already happening. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Sure.
And I see Dan Shiner.
Hi, everybody. Thanks. First off, thanks for hosting this. It was just fabulously interesting and helpful. My name is Dan. I actually come from the vendor side. So I work at a vendor called Signal One AI. And we produce a health AI governance platform. So a bit of a different scope than some of the things that you are working on right now, but obviously kind of related. And openly, as as our product evolves, a lot of the pain points you've been describing are problems that we've been investigating. And like you guys are at the head of the pack, but it's exactly where we see the world heading. So just a couple, sort of one thought against that backdrop, and then one question. The thought would be, I have no idea how you guys weren't on our radar, because your thinking here is so advanced. We've been talking to, as part of our own just internal research, we've been going out and talking to other health systems focusing on this problem. We've spoken to 10 right now across North America. We have like this master spreadsheet of how different health systems are tackling a lot of the governance problems that you've described. So to the degree to which that would be helpful in your research, it's just an internal document, but we're happy to share kind of what we've learned from other health systems across the country, because everyone's tackling this a little bit different. In particular, on the revenue and ROI impact, that's an area where we were particularly surprised. We found a couple of health systems doing some really interesting things. So that's just a thought. You sort of feel a bit like a kindred spirit here. We've been focusing on this sort of on our own island. It's really fun to see that other folks are working on this problem. So three, which can be helpful. Always happy to share that. That's sort of my commentary. My question is, interested to hear what you've learned about monitoring third-party vendors. Because one of the things we've heard mixed reviews. I don't think we have enough information to know the best practice yet. But one of the things we've heard is that when it comes to programmatically monitoring these, there aren't always APIs available. We've just been talking to the head of AI at various health systems, and we've heard, in our negotiation process, we've contracted that we need to be able to monitor performance and quality, but we get that in a PDF, once a month or once a quarter. And we're wrestling with how to get that to flow into a health system. So I don't know how reflective that is, but that was a long way to ask my question. Like, have you guys looked into the monitoring of third-party solutions, and what have you learned about the availability of the sort of performance and safety data that you need? Because right now we've heard mixed things.
Yeah, I can take that one. So yes, I mean, we are monitoring third-party solutions. I would say it is really challenging because it really depends on a partnership with a vendor. And we've been fortunate in that, like, most of our third-party tools or vendors like see us as partners. And so, they're interested in our feedback around monitoring. They're building out things that could potentially scale to other health systems. And so there's like some mutual benefit to the sharing of the data. It is imperfect in some things, like come to us on a once a month frequency, et cetera. But it's like something we're continually working on, is getting that into appropriate data structures. I would say this is where, like, there's actually a lot of, this is where the importance of national partnership comes in, because I think that most of the work that's happening like in national partnerships is higher level and like more framework oriented, as opposed to saying like, this is what everyone needs delivered in this fashion to deploy and monitor an AI scribe tool. And so I'm hoping we can actually start getting to that work, because I think that's what's going to be able to make it easier for us to do the monitoring and have the data we need. I'd say at like the University of California level, I'm working with a couple other sites to actually build out like, what does our exact vendor toolkit look like? Like, what do we give to the vendors and say, if you want to partner with the University of California, any of our like major hospital systems, like, this is what we need you to share. And I see someone put into the chat like the principles of CHAI, and I would say like CHAI is, again, like, and I'm involved in CHAI, it's very framework oriented, and it's not to the level where it's like, to monitor AI scribes, we need data on latency like delivered to us like at least weekly, so we can make sure that like the turnaround time on notes is adequate, for example, for physicians to use it in day-to-day practice. And so I think it's getting to that level of detail that's going to be really important. And that's going to have to happen through like national partnerships, et cetera, because it's not going to come from a regulatory perspective, obviously.
Okay, super interesting.
Yeah.
I could ask more, but I see there's a lot of other questions. So thanks again for everybody for hosting. This has been great.
Okay, I'm going to go to questions at the top of the chat. I see that, MI Scarlett asked, how can algorithms be improved to reduce bias, increase sensitivity, and how should clinicians be informed of these changes in algorithms?
So I would, so I guess I would say like in terms of how that's a big question. Like that's like an entire like semester of lecture series with that you'll come to the end of without answers. But you know, I would say like one of the things what we're really focused on is so like understanding the bias that exists in the tools that we're deploying, because you know, and often like we're talking about vendor tools here, and so we're not doing kind of the upstream bias mitigation, but the thing that's really important in terms of mitigating bias is actually workflow and how the tools are used. And so one of the things that's like very deeply embedded in our AI oversight process is actually like, how does this fit into the workflow? How are people supposed to use the tool? What's the intended use of the tool? And then like, what guardrails do we have in place to ensure the tool is used as designed? Because you can imagine like the same tool could be used to very different outcomes, depending on what you're predicting and how people are using those predictions. And so that's a lot of what we've tried to build into the oversight process. And it's like how we're thinking about some of our fairness balancing metrics as we build out AI monitoring.
Julia, thank you for being here. I know she just joined. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome, Julia. I'm trying to get to the next question. So Sheena Cutting, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, said, does the program include education for clinical staff to help them develop foundational knowledge on how to use tools and participate in continuous quality improvement?
So again, the deployment of tools is paired with the educational initiatives. We also have general educational initiatives like aimed at different user groups. So people who want to use large language models, complete like some training around like bias and limitations of those tools. People who want to, like in health IT, for example, we have kind of added training that we require of all of our IT staff. And so training is really tailored more to like the initial deployment rather than IMPACC itself. But the idea with IMPACC is that if there are things that become concerning, then that would lead to like operational action that may or may not include training, depending on what we want to mitigate. Is the oversight process standard across departments at UCSF? Yeah, so the oversight process is not just standard, it's standard across the entire organization. And so that's why I said we have this, like, it's a unified governance process. It crosses like campus, health, all domains that are coming into the health system. The oversight process doesn't monitor like non-health tools. So for example, if you just have like an HR tool, for example, that's like doing hiring in the med school or something like that, we are not overseeing that, but we're in the process at UCSF of establishing like AI oversight committees kind of to work in parallel with ours to address like those administrative use cases of AI and educational use cases that don't specifically touch healthcare delivery. The scope of healthcare delivery is already so big, we can't have one committee do everything, but our hope is to kind of set up parallel processes that work together and kind of pass things around when needed.
Sarah, can I actually ask you, because this came up on my prior call, because my understanding is that radiology, right, sort of built some of their own because they were more ahead. Like, can you just speak to like whether radiology has done their own version of AI monitoring that's like similar to ours, but different because it's imaging focused?
Yeah, so the imaging, so radiology did, like years ago, build an AI oversight committee because radiology in general has been ahead in terms of what's happening in AI. What we did a couple years ago is we took that committee and we folded it into our AI oversight committee as the imaging subcommittee, recognizing that they're working with like multimodal data and a lot of imaging data, and there's just kind of different boundaries around the expertise that's needed. There's overlapping representation on the committees, but like also different members. We are now in the process of working with the imaging oversight committee to help them streamline their processes. What's ended up happening is like we've gotten actually relatively streamlined because our data scientists do a lot of pre-work with these tools to get them prepared to come before the committee. And imaging oversight is still kind of working the way they did like 4 years ago, where faculty talk for 4 hours. And so we're trying to kind of help, we're trying to work together to like really standardize the process. And then I would say the other big, because the volume is getting so much higher, we're trying to also create fast track processes for oversight that cross both the kind of overall AI oversight committee and the imaging subcommittee as well. How you write those criteria is really challenging, right? Because like FDA approval, like things are often not really approved because like the data was good. They're approved because they're similar to something else that's already approved, et cetera. So we're trying to figure out exactly what those criteria look like. But there are certainly things that happen in imaging, like as part of a radiology tool, there is AI-based 3D reconstruction of something. It's basically impossible to measure. So there's got to be some way we just kind of keep tabs on these things, but don't have, you know, full expensive committee faculty discussion about them. Does that answer your question, Julia?
Yeah. And do they have like anything like our monitoring framework for their tools? Like, are they monitoring their tools on an ongoing basis?
They are, it depends on the tool. Like they have things come back to the imaging subcommittee. Yeah.
I see another one of the questions I'm kind of combining two here is what do you see as the key ROI from the IMPACC program? And is the organization asking you to demonstrate that in the near or long term?
Can take a stab at it, and Sarah and Julia can chime in. It's interesting. We are very interested and focused on, let's say, outcomes for patients, experience of healthcare providers, and safety. And I would say that actually examinations of like revenue have been very secondary. And in fact, they're sort of like almost exploratory at this point. And so I feel like we're focusing on the things that matter. And those are the things that we're hoping to have a return on investment on in terms of our monitoring. But Sarah and Julia, I'd love to hear your perspective too.
I think there's a sense that it is the right thing to do. And we're also in California, where I think in the absence of federal regulation, there's still a lot of regulatory work happening at the state level. We've been like pretty directly engaged with the California Attorney General, a number of senators who are working on this from a regulatory standpoint. And so I think it's just, I don't know that we have the ROI on AI monitoring for UCSF Health is that it is the right thing to do. And it is our responsibility. And we haven't been, and I will set that separately from like, much of my job is actually deciding what we do from the AI perspective at UCSF. And that always comes with an expected ROI of some form, whether it's improved patient safety or provider satisfaction or something else. But I do think the ROI on this is that it's seen as completely necessary.
Yeah, not me. I'll just add we were in a very fortunate position to get like a donor gift to be able to kick off this work. And so I think it gave us a little bit of a runway to be able to show that this is valuable. And so at the point that, you know, we do ask the health system to support the full program in an ongoing way, I hope that we'll have the evidence, not just for UCSF, but for other health systems to show why there is a positive ROI for this.
Okay, I know we're coming up to the end of time, so maybe we'll just do one more question. Are you looking at burnout as kind of a key measure here? Are you hoping that burnout will be reduced in a measurable way as a result of the program itself?
I can start, and I'm sure you guys will have some additional comments. We spent a lot of time thinking about how to measure these concepts of burnout, of cognitive burden, of just like the load that people feel with things like documentation and practice, and also with in-basket management and things like that. And so I think that a really key metric for monitoring is the impact on those things. And so I think we have some quantitative things like, you know, surveys that are going out, but we also have a plan to do qualitative work as well, because I think there are some aspects of this that are subtle and that might not come out in a survey. I can just speak for myself and say that, like, I love being liberated from my keyboard when I'm talking to patients, especially when it's a new patient, just like not having to like type when they're first in the room. And some of that is like, you know, there might be a lot of things making me feel burned out right now. Some of them are outside of healthcare. So I feel like we need the quantitative data, but we need the qualitative data. And I hope we can move both, actually, you know, both, you know, reductions in work after work and, you know, things like that, but also just the subjective feeling of practicing medicine and being able to reduce some of the administrative burdens that just get in our way.
Okay, well, I think that's all we have time for today, but thank you all so much for joining us and for the fantastic presentation. And thank you to everyone for attending and for your questions and engagement. We hope to see you again next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.